Welcome, friend, to Life and Liberty Radio. I'm David Householder, here to encourage your pursuit of happiness. You and I are partners, exploring our shared spiritual journeys. Together, we're dreaming and working for a free society. Tell others today about our adventure in faith and freedom. So breathe in, open your mind, lift up your spirit. Let's get started. This is the fourth of 7 podcasts on the 2013 State of the Union Address from President Barack Obama. You may ask yourself, why do you need 7 podcasts to cover one speech? Well, the truth is, I want to get at every single line, every single thought, and talk about my perspective on why the entire thing is off. And it's not off because he made 100 mistakes. It's off because he made one mistake, which is this: central planning is the way to fix things. The people can't be trusted, and they won't figure it out on their own. Government is needed to make sure things happen correctly. But the truth is, it just never ever works. So we're going to look at what he talked about with job creation. And with job creation, he basically said, hey, we've started all these new jobs, and it's really great, and isn't that cool? Because the government started jobs. Well, the government never creates jobs. The government takes jobs away. Actually, the government steals jobs. You may say, steals jobs? How do they do that? Well, they coerce money from you, and at the time of this recording, we're heading into tax season. And it's not an ask thing, it's a tell thing when it comes to taxes. You will pay them, and if you don't, you will be punished. So that money is taken out of the private sector, out of corporations and individuals. And it goes straight to the government, where people start working and have jobs with that money. So that money could have created jobs in the private sector, but no, it creates jobs in the public sector. Now, that would be fine if we all contributed by voluntary contribution to the public sector, but you and I both know that that's not true. So basically, the president is coming with the State of the Union to say, when it comes right down to it, I want to steal some more jobs, so I need more taxes, and I'm going to call that a balanced approach, because I'll steal a little bit, and you have a little bit less, so that it's balanced. It's heads I win, tails you lose. So basically, he has every right to protect the public sector. He's the head of the public sector, and of course, he's going to advocate for the public sector. And he really doesn't understand the private sector at all, nor should he. He doesn't spend much time in it. So podcast 4, we're going to talk about central planning. So the president says, when it comes to jobs, there are things we can do right now to accelerate this trend of government job creation. Last year, we created our first Manufacturing Innovation Institute in Youngstown, Ohio. A once-shuttered warehouse is now a state-of-the-art lab where new workers are mastering the 3D printing that has the potential to revolutionize the way we make almost everything. No reason this can't happen in other towns. So tonight, I'm announcing the launch of 3 more of these manufacturing hubs, where businesses will partner with the Department of Defense and Energy to turn regions left behind by globalization into global centers of high-tech jobs. And I asked the Congress to help create a network of 15 of these hubs and guarantee that the next revolution in manufacturing is made in America. Well, let's look at that. Regions left behind by globalization. Well, basically, we've been outcompeted by other places that offer a better work environment. Why do they offer a better work environment? Because they have less regulation. They have less control from the government, and they actually encourage companies to come their way. Can you imagine the difference between starting a business in California and starting one in India? That would be an easy choice in most cases, all things else being equal, because of the lack of regulation in India. You could go there and sort of set the tone, and towns would compete to have you there. Whereas in California, you are penalized for starting a business. You pay $800 a year just for the privilege of listing your business in California, which I think is kind of strange, no matter how small your business is, no matter even if your corporation is just you. So it's easy to see why globalization has not gone well, Whereas if we were to take down tariffs and take down protection and deregulate the society and actually let the market do its thing, we'd outcompete almost everyone because we have a gigantic free market continent-wide with the English spoken all the way across the country and just an outstanding work ethic and a history of all kinds of good stuff. So we would do fine if the government would get out of the way. Why has globalization wrecked America? Because the government has tried to protect us. And why should it do that? Why should the government protect us and protect our jobs? Well, that's like taxi drivers. Can you imagine taxi drivers deploying all over the city? And then the businesses of the city moving, let's say, to the northeastern segment of the city. And that's where the new industry is, and that's where everything is happening. So the taxi drivers get upset and say, hey, in the southwestern part of the city, there's less taxi rides. Now, the government would come in and say, well, we need to subsidize the taxi drivers in the southwest side, and we need to organize and divvy out who gets to be where. Whereas private enterprise would fix this in about 2 days. In fact, as the businesses are migrating, the taxi cabs would be migrating with them. The market makes 1,000 little adjustments every day, so it doesn't ever have to make big ones. The government's getting so far behind, it's going to have to make massive adjustments in so many things, because for the government, there is no bottom line, and there is no profit motive, and there is no sense of having to stay in tune with the market. So why would we want government-sponsored manufacturing hubs? Why would we give money to the public sector to teach the private sector what the private sector already knows? Why would we want the inefficient sector to teach the efficient sector what to do? If you want to help manufacturing in those areas, make them free trade zones, take away the taxes. Companies would love to come there. Take away the regulation of wages. Take away all of those things that get in the way of companies getting started. They'd love to be there. Believe me, companies would love to go to the American Midwest. There's a highly skilled workforce and a work ethic and lots of good things. They'd love to go there, but what's keeping them there from going there is government intervention. And think about it. Why do we need government-sponsored innovation in technology? Look at the big leaps forward in technology in the world. Look at your iPhone. Look at your car. Look at all of the different things that are so much better than they used to be. Were any of them innovated by government-sponsored manufacturing hubs? Of course not. It was Steve Jobs in his garage that did this, and it's private enterprise that does this. The idea that we'd have central planning doing this is like having Cylindravilles everywhere. We all know how well Cylindra worked. So massive government expenditure for what? For what? Then he goes on to talk about energy. Energy is one of those things I believe that Barack Obama feels in his heart of hearts. He's not trying to fool us with this stuff. He really believes it. He believes in clean energy. Some teacher told him probably in 5th grade, son, we are running this country on oil, but we're going to run out of oil, and maybe it's your generation that's going to teach us to harness the energy of the sun. And somehow that seed went deep into his heart and has been blossoming ever since. And God bless him for wanting to do that. Perhaps he should have gone into something like an energy company trying to figure out how to make things work. He might have actually done some good that way. But the truth is he believes that the government is going to be the entity. Central planning is going to be what brings about green energy. That's what's going to do it. And it's going to take an Apollo program of investment, according to him. Barack Obama says, and today, no area holds more promise than our investments in American energy. After years of talking about it, we are finally poised to control our own energy future. We produce more oil at home than we have in 15 years. And we've doubled the distance our cars will go on a gallon of gas. Well, a lot of this is kind of debatable. But the truth is we are finally poised to control our own energy future. And it's not because of green energy. It's because natural gas is being found all over the place. It's because we have new technologies that help us to unlock oil from the ground that we didn't have before. That it looks like we could become the major oil producer of the whole region, perhaps the world. That we're very, very close to becoming totally energy sufficient in North America. So that would be a really, really good thing. But he's sort of taking credit for that, where that had nothing, once again, to do with central planning. It had everything to do with the market. Americans want oil and gas, and people will find a way to get it to them if the government doesn't get in the way. And the truth is, the market will also try to give you clean energy because people want clean energy. Okay, just ask 10 people, do you want clean energy or dirty energy? Would you like to live in a place run by natural gas or London back when everybody was burning coal? Well, of course people would choose natural gas, which is cleaner. And eventually we will find other ways of making energy work. But the truth is, oil and wind are not yet profitable. And the reason they're not profitable is that natural gas is cheaper. Natural gas is much, much cheaper. You get a lot more efficiency out of it. And the mechanics that we've put together to harvest the sun and the wind tend to be fragile. So what do I mean by that? A solar panel is fragile. I was just staying with some friends in Temecula, and they, meaning well, put up a whole bunch of solar panels, and BP is going to come in and replace them all because they're broken. They're fragile. They're exposed to the elements, and they're very complex. You get something technologically complex and expose it to the elements, and it won't work much longer. That's just the truth. That I drive by the windmills here in California on the way to Palm Springs, and hundreds of them. They're in the valley, and they're churning away, and 1 out of 3, 1 out of 4 are always broken down because they are vulnerable. They're very expensive to build, but they're exposed to the elements, and the complexity of them makes it very difficult for them to be profitable. So we have to figure something out. So if you want to never figure this out, put the government in charge of it. If you want these things to be figured out, in other words, how to have less fragile, more robust solar and wind energy, let the market do it, because someone will make a lot of money figuring it out. If you leave them alone, it was the bicycle mechanics who had the first airplane, the Wright brothers, who were tinkerers, not the Langleys. And the Langleys were deeply subsidized by the United States government, and everything they put into the air went right into the Potomac River. It didn't work. So central planning is never as good as bicycle mechanics. Let people do things. If people need energy, the market will sense that. It's called demand, and it will find a way to meet that demand. And the market is not out there to exploit the consumer. The market is there to serve the consumer. Whoever serves the consumer best with the cheapest, cleanest, most efficient form of energy will make the most money. And they would be glad to do so. What messes that up is central planning getting in the way of it. But Barack Obama believes that central planning is the key, and he believes that he can convince you of it. So, we produce more oil at home than we have in 15 years. Yes, we do. In fact, we're poised to produce more than we ever have. We've doubled the distance our cars will go on a gallon of gas. Perhaps that's stretching it a bit, but politicians stretch things. I expect that. But the truth is, cars are more efficient than they used to be, and they're more efficient because customers have demanded them. It's very little to do with regulation. In fact, I had, up until last summer, a Citroën deux Chevaux, which is a French car with 1938 technology. This is the homeliest car ever made, and it was a 2-cylinder front-wheel drive, air-cooled, on-road, off-road car. And I love driving it. Very robust. Robust is a key word here. We need to create robust things, not fragile things. And the government seems to create complex, fragile things, complex, fragile bureaucracies, complex, fragile military equipment, complex, fragile M16s as opposed to robust AK-47s, complex, fragile fighter planes, complex, fragile solar panels, complex, fragile space shuttles. We lost 2 out of 5. 40% of the fleet blew up. while the Russians continue in their robust capsules to ferry us to the space station. And so when it comes down to it, this little robust car got me 50 to 75 miles a gallon all the time. And it was really old. Well, it did it because the technology's been around for a long time. People don't want it yet. They don't need it yet because the supply and demand curve does not warrant it at this point. So mileage in itself is not good. If the gas prices stay around $5 a gallon in today's dollars, then mileage will improve in the cars. We've had the technology to go 50 to 75 miles a gallon since the late 30s. And it would be there in a minute without regulation if the prices got high enough where people really demanded it. So we have to let the market do what it does. And then he talks about and the renewable energy we generate from sources like wind and solar with tens of thousands of good American jobs to show for it. Tens of thousands of jobs are a drop in the bucket of the American workforce, statistically insignificant. Let me say that again. Statistically insignificant. Then he goes on to say, we produce more natural gas than ever before, and nearly everyone's energy bill is lower because of it. Would you please write to me at Liberty House, if that's the case for you? Liberty, H-O-U-S, one word, no E, Liberty House, at Liberty House on Twitter, and tell me if your energy bill is lower. I just don't see that happening anywhere. Maybe I'm missing something. I understand the president doesn't pay his own energy bill, but last I checked, we're all getting gouged on the utilities because they are generally state-sponsored monopolies or near monopolies, whereas if you were to just get the government out of energy production, people would drop a little thing the size of a brick over your house the first of every month, and it would give you energy for 2 months. I'm seriously, we could do that. And people would be glad to do that, to get rid of the grid. You say, we can't get rid of the grid. You need the grid. Well, we used to think we needed the wires for the phones, and we don't anymore. Because what solved that? The government? No. If the government was in charge of our phone system, we'd still have Motorola walkie-talkies from the 30s and the 40s. No, it's been innovation. People want better, faster, cheaper, cleaner, all of which is good. And the private market knows exactly how to provide that for people. So please get in touch with me on Twitter if your energy bill is lower. Over the last 4 years, our emissions of the dangerous carbon pollution that threatens our planet have actually fallen. No, but they said the sky was falling. Oh my goodness, because we didn't sign the global warming accords. Well, the 4 biggest polluters, the United States, China, India, and Russia, refused to sign these accords because they didn't make sense economically. So we didn't sign them. And yet, our emissions of the dangerous carbon pollution that threatens our planet have actually fallen. Why? Because people like clean energy, and the market wants to provide it. Despite the government, air is getting cleaner. In fact, air is getting cleaner in India. Air is getting cleaner in China. Air is getting cleaner in Russia. And air is getting cleaner in the United States. And why is that? Because we're all regulating more? No, not at all. Because people want it. And there's more competition. And people are glad to provide clean energy to people who want it. So without all the restrictions that Al Gore asked for, we're doing way better, and it's continuing to get better. For the trend lines behind the headlines, listen daily to The Bottom Line on KBRT in Los Angeles, KCBC in San Francisco, KBRT740.com, worldwide live streaming. California's voice for life and liberty. But for the sake of our children, he says, and our future, we must do more to combat climate change. And he goes on and on talking about climate change. Well, the truth is the climate is changing. And truth is we also don't know in which direction. And so over the last 15 years, it's been this. 15 years in geological, climate, meteorological time is nothing. It's insignificant, makes no difference. And so the truth is, we don't know how the climate is changing. We also don't know what effect we have on it. Now, if you were to say your life is at stake and you must decide, you must guess correctly, what has the most effect on the planet's temperature? The ebbs and flows of the sun's nuclear engine, which is many times the size of Earth, and if the sun catches a cold, we get pneumonia, to say the least, or our carbon emissions. I would say that would be the sun. It's just logic. And do I think that our carbon emissions have helped the environment? No, absolutely not. I think we need to get rid of them. And I think that we would get rid of them if it wasn't for the government. In fact, if the central planning had not been a part of things, we'd have much cleaner energy for the whole last 100 of years, because we wouldn't have built the interstate system. The interstate system has caused more pollution than anything else in the United States. And it was built by the government. Socialist cement, I call it. The ugliest, least effective form of transportation I've ever seen. Deadly dangerous. Thousands of people die on our highways. We lose a Korean War worth of people every year on the highways. Most dangerous form of transportation known to man. And what do? We encourage it by building massive freeways, which create massive urban sprawl, which create massive housing tracts, which use a lot more energy. And a lot more cars polluting. Interesting. So which has more smog, San Francisco or LA? Well, that'd be LA. Why? Because San Francisco was built during the time of trolleys and streetcars and pedestrian traffic. And LA came into its adulthood with the automobile and the freeways. And so we have a massive problem in Southern California, and it's pretty hard to change because most of the housing tracts were built assuming that the automobile would be the thing and that freeways would continue to be built by the government. People don't realize we used to have a private transportation system in most cities. In Los Angeles, we had the red lines, and you could get from Huntington Beach to downtown Los Angeles for a fraction of the cost you can now, even in today's dollars, in 40 minutes, and you could do all your work on the way because you'd be sitting in the red car, and you'd run into almost no interference through traffic or anything else, and it was low emissions, and it was private, and it was profitable. Private transportation works better than public transportation. So what are we going to do now? Well, the freeways have put us in quite a pickle. First of all, they're badly designed. They're designed by government committees, central planning again, and they don't really get us where we need to go, and they just create snarls all over the city because they're so badly planned because there's no bottom line and no profit motive and no business plan. Wonder why they don't work. So next time you're sitting in traffic, thank the socialist cement that they are, and think to yourself, I wonder if the government had not intervened and just let people figure out transportation. If there's a demand for getting around, the market will provide it. Imagine that. Who knows how we'd be traveling around if it wasn't for that. So the government caused much of the pollution in the United States through its policies of interstate highways and also through the protection of polluters. The protection of polluters, absolutely. It used to be in common law that you could sue a polluter because if a polluter polluted the air around your house, that was an infringement on your rights and it damaged your property, perhaps your health. You could sue back. Well, with the progressive era, we started to push back on that, and the government gave all kinds of exemptions for pollution, this vital national resource interest, all this kind of stuff, and you no longer could do that. And it's really tough now to sue a polluter, where it used to be really easy to do. In common law, the ability to sue a polluter kept the English-speaking world clean for centuries. But we decided we were going to change that and protect them. So government, in its protection of the polluters and building of the freeways, has caused most of the pollution. Then they come to us and say, we're going to fix it. I think they're just going to make it worse like they do with everything. Government should stick to governing and stay away from other things. So then he goes on to talk about the fact that he's going to do executive actions to get things done. And then he says, so let's generate even more of this new energy. Solar energy gets cheaper by the year, so let's drive down the costs even further. You can't drive down the costs by pouring money into something and having it cost 4 times as much as it would if you'd left it alone. Look at Solyndra. Look at the solar power things here in California. It costs 4 times as much per kilowatt hour to produce energy with these solar plants than it does the traditional way with gas, oil, and other things. Well, so who's going to pay for that? Well, subsidies, of course. So how's that driving the cost down? It subsidizes the cost and keeps the industry from being profitable. You give things a subsidy, they never have to learn to become profitable. There's no take away the bottom line is what you've done, so they don't have to innovate and they don't have to do it. They're not motivated to do it. And you build these massive solar farms, and guess what they are? That's right, fragile. Very, very fragile. They won't last nearly as long as people say, and they'll start to break down very quickly because they're complex and they are exposed to the elements. So we continue to go down through his speech. He says, if a nonpartisan coalition of CEOs and retired generals and admirals can get behind the idea of getting rid of cars with any emissions at all, then so can we. Let's take their advice and free our families and businesses from the painful spikes in gas prices we've put up with for far too long. The painful spikes in gas prices. I hate to say this, but we need the fluctuation in gas prices. You may say, oh, what do you mean? They go up, it's terrible for everybody. No, it's not. When gas prices go up, that's really good for you. Why is that? Because it makes it profitable for people to hunt for oil. Something like oil has to go up and down in cycles. Because if it goes down, well, let's put it this way. Let's say you start in the middle and the supply starts to get short, which it does because the oil wells that are dug are starting to get depleted and demand goes up, supply goes down, and that means the price goes up. So when that happens, then we run into a major, major problem, and that is that there isn't enough gas. And so what happens is the market responds. Hey, it's getting more expensive. That gives us bigger profits. Oh, go for those profits, the oil companies. No. What do you think oil companies do with their profits? They look for more oil. That's right. And they can only do it when the price is high. So when the price is high, guess what they do? They all go prospecting with their extra money. They don't spend it on donuts and stuff and cruises. There's way too... they're in the oil business. They're going to look for more oil. And they do. And they spend almost all their profits looking for more oil. And when they do, which they did recently, guess what happens? The supply goes up. And when the supply goes up, the price goes down. And it stays down for a while until the supply starts to dry up. And then the price starts to go up, which gives them profits, which they go hunting for oil. You see, the prices have to go up and down for things to work. That's how the market works, but our president doesn't understand the market, so he's going to lead the country in the entirely wrong direction. He goes on, I'm also issuing a new goal for America. Let's cut in half the energy wasted by our homes and businesses over the next 20 years. The states with the best ideas to create jobs and lower energy bills by constructing more efficient buildings will receive federal support to help make it happen. Once again, picking winners, picking losers, rather than letting the market do it. And how would they do this without measuring it? And how would they measure it without monitoring it? And how do they monitor it without checking everyone's energy bill and following how much energy people are losing from their homes and their factories? This is what we call feudal, as in medieval, building codes. The lord of the manor wants to inspect his house. And the truth is, if the government was in charge of all of our houses, they'd become less efficient almost immediately. You and I are motivated to keep waste away because of the bills. And if the bills stay low, there's no point in lowering the bills. Once they get painful, we will. It's just the truth. We'll start to insulate when we can't afford it. We have to let the market do its thing. So, he continues to talk about energy. And he talks about high-tech schools and self-healing power grids. What if we don't need power grids? The CEO of Siemens America, a company that brought hundreds of new jobs to North Carolina, has said that if we upgrade our infrastructure, they'll bring even more jobs. If we upgrade our infrastructure is a word for government spending. It's a code word. Well, sure, I'm sure if you asked the CEO of Siemens America, would you like better infrastructure? He'd say, sure. Fine. It's a German company. If you guys want to spend money over here in America on your infrastructure, that's great. Well, if infrastructure is the key, why are all the jobs leaving infrastructure-rich Midwest America and the Rust Belt and going to India with no infrastructure? Perhaps that would be because there's no regulation there, or very little. And more people have been brought out of poverty in India in the last generation than anywhere else in the history of the human race. So all kinds of prosperity is coming to India because they are learning how to do free enterprise. Then he says, tonight I propose a fix-it-first program to put people to work as soon as possible on our most urgent repairs, like the nearly 70,000 structurally deficient bridges across the country. Well, I had people I know, actually, go down in the Minnesota bridge collapse across the Mississippi River on I-35W, and it's not a pretty sight. And we've all seen those bridges with rust. And we have to ask ourselves again, why do we want to prop up the interstate system, which is the biggest mistake this country has ever made in terms of infrastructure? Do we want to continue a completely non-sustainable system with no business plan, with no bottom line, continues to encourage pollution, or should we just let the system go a little bit and let the weeds grow up through the concrete? It wouldn't take long before the whole thing was composted, which I think would be good for the country. We really don't need to keep these bridges up because private enterprise would do a whole lot better job of doing this. The railroad system did great until the government started to compete with roads, which are socialist, as opposed to the railroads, which were private. Of course, the railroads got together and they banded together and formed all kinds of interstate commerce commissions and things like that. And that's what we call crony capitalism. That's not a free market. You can read all about that in Atlas Shrugged, which is a fascinating story about the railroads. So, why is the public sector in charge of infrastructure? And what's the incentive to fix rusty interstate bridges? So that's podcast 4 of 7. And I want to just continue to go point by point through the State of the Union address. We'll be following it up with podcast 5, where we talk about something that affects you very much: housing. Well, that's all for today on Life and Liberty Radio. Thanks so much for sharing this part of your spiritual journey with me. Now, the views on this program are not necessarily those of my advertisers, sponsors, places I work, or do business with. They're purely my own, but I'm sharing them with you, so share your ideas with me. Write me on Twitter at Liberty House, LIBERTYHOUS, no E. Until next time, let's continue dreaming and working for a free and spiritually grounded society.